This is episode number 174. Today, we're featuring the amazing Lyn Boyer.
This is the PleinAir Podcast with Eric Rhoads, publisher and founder of PleinAir Magazine. In the PleinAir Podcast, we cover the world of outdoor painting. Called PleinAir, the French coined the term, which means open air or outdoors. The French pronounce it plein air. Others say plain air. No matter how you say it, there is a huge movement of artists around the world who are going outdoors to paint. And this show is about that movement. Now, here's your host, author, publisher, and painter, Eric Rhoads.
Well, thank you, Jim Kipping, and welcome everybody to the PleinAir Podcast. I'm Eric Rhoads. I've been watching you on social media. I'm seeing more and more people getting outside to paint, more than ever, I think. It's clearly a movement, young and old. More people trying it out. I love the fact that you've been listening to the podcast and then going out and trying it. I know a lot of you are diehards. You've been doing this a long time, but there are a lot of new ones discovering plein air painting, which I am really, really encouraged about. So make sure you post or hashtag for PleinAir Magazine on Instagram or Facebook. Just go to hashtag PleinAir Mag for Instagram and Facebook and follow it, of course, and put us in your hashtags. I've been busily doing updates every day, 12 noon live, and if you've not tuned in, come to my page. It's a way to keep people who have been occupied with staying at home, keep them busy and engaged. I'm doing it on Instagram and Facebook on my personal page, Eric Rhoads, or Eric Rhoads Publisher on Facebook. And at 3 p.m. daily on Streamline Art Video, we're doing free daily training segments. We will keep it going till the quarantine has stopped pretty much everywhere, at least in America. You can find it on YouTube or Facebook. Go to YouTube or Facebook and search Streamline Art Video. Also, we're giving away a beautiful painting worth almost $3,000 from the amazing artist Joseph McGurl. And if you're listening to this and you want to try and win a painting, just go to paintinggiveaway.com. You only need to enter one time, but do it before the 31st. We will announce the winner probably on the 1st or on the 2nd. So, also on the 31st, the price of the PleinAir Convention goes up. We have given our lowest price. We rescheduled the convention for August in Santa Fe, and we will be safely holding it in Santa Fe and following the rules. And we also have a quarantine, meaning a guarantee about quarantine. So if you have to cancel or move, or we have to move, or you can't make it because of the quarantines or whatever, you can get a full refund from us. But you want to get that done, sign up at PleinAirConvention.com. Remember, it's the first time we've done it in the summer. Santa Fe in the summer, because of the altitude, is a lot cooler than you think it would be, and it's a beautiful time to paint. So just go to PleinAirConvention.com and sign up. Also, enter your best paintings at PleinAirSalon.com by May 31st. Because you can potentially win the $15,000 all-cash grand prize and the cover of PleinAir Magazine, among other prizes. Lots going on. Busier than ever. By the way, I should mention, if you're new to plein air painting, we've got a free ebook called 240 Plein Air Tips. Just get it at PleinAirTips.com. Coming up after the interview, I'm going to answer some art marketing questions in the Art Marketing Minute. But first, let's get right to the interview. You're going to have fun with this one. This is Lyn Boyer. Lyn Boyer, welcome to the PleinAir Podcast.
Thank you, Eric. Thanks for inviting me, and it's really good to chat with you.
Well, thank you. You might want to wait till the end of this before you say that, because you might not feel that way when this is all over.
Oh, all right. I withdraw that, and I ask for a do-over. Hi, Eric.
Hi, Lyn.
It might be nice to talk to you. I'm not sure yet.
It might not be. Lyn,
Yes.
See, I can tell I've already lost control, and having spent time with you, I know that it's not possible to have control.
Eric, why would you say such a thing?
When did you and I first meet? Do you remember?
I think we actually met perhaps very briefly in Tucson in an elevator.
Oh, yeah.
And that was
that one time I was in an elevator in Tucson.
that one time when you were in an elevator in Tucson, which
I actually, it's funny. I actually remember that moment now because it was an elevator in the back of the resort.
Yeah.
On the back side. I'm surprised I remember it, quite frankly. I can't even remember my own name.
Yeah, but it was just brief. We were in an elevator. I said hi, you said hi. I think I said thank you.
Yes, you did. So, but we really got to know each other when you went to Cuba with us.
Yes.
That was a lot of fun.
Yeah. That was a highlight. So memorable. That was a last-minute thing for me. I think I saw one of your posts and it said, few seats left or 2 days left or something. And boy, am I glad I pulled the trigger. It still is pivotal to a lot of my art and the friendships made and getting to know you. And
we had a lot of fun. We ended up painting together a lot, and I have a painting that, believe it or not, that I just completed. Do you remember that time we went out on the, what do they call it, the barrio or the area on the water? Remember we were like, it was almost sunset, and we're walking back from painting all day, and we see this scene of some fort or something across the water, and the sun is going down, and we said, let's knock a quick one out, and we literally set up. We did a 15-minute painting, and by then it was completely dark, and it was, for me, it was one of the best paintings I did the whole trip.
Yeah, that was a fabulous moment. In fact, I was going through my photos a little while ago and actually came by those photos and remembered that moment. And I've actually found that occasionally a few of my very favorite paintings have been done in those circumstances where there's just a moment and the stars align and you don't have forever. So I think we all just focused.
Well, I think it might even be more than just focus. It might be we don't have time to think.
Yes, overthink.
So we're being instinctive. We're just, I remember, I don't think we had 15 minutes to do that painting.
No. Mm-mm.
And so we were being instinctive, right? We were just laying down, recording notes.
Yep. Very, very direct, pure observation. And something that really means a lot to me is in those moments is it's a pure response to what's there.
So how do you train yourself to do that? Because you have a sense of that in your paintings all the time, which I'm very jealous of, by the way. But how do you get there? Because our tendency is to want to just overthink everything.
Mm-hmm. That's a good observation, and I agree that we tend to. I call it kill it to death. We have an immediate response to a scene or a sense response to things around us that has a real purity to it, and then we proceed to kill it to death. But to go back to your question is how do we train ourselves to do that? The first thing I want to say is it's possible for it to become not just an accident. And I actually had to train myself to do that. And actually, if it's any comfort to the listeners, wanted to give up so many times. I mean, I'm pretty tough, and it takes a lot for me to want to give up, and I don't ever give up. But I came so close in my painting career just to go, I am so over this. It's just too hard. And that's the moment that, and I want to leave this with everybody, is that picture you're hitting a boulder with a sledgehammer and you've hit it 100 times. In other words, you've done that same painting or maybe made that same error in a painting or killed 100 paintings, and you just go, apparently I can't do this. I want you to think of that as that boulder sitting in front of you. And what you didn't see was every time maybe you had a failure, you were putting that micro crack through that boulder. And if you walk away, you will never know if it was going to be the next swing that boulder broke apart. And what I found is that your leaps of progress then happen very suddenly.
What a great analogy. And that boulder is in your path. And if you can't go around it, you can't go under it, you can't go over it. So the only thing you can do is break it up.
Absolutely. And part B to your question was, to me, that's why you don't give up. But then part B is, how do we train ourselves to start becoming more consistent with that pure responsiveness, where we get that. In other words, where we're putting, life comes at us, the life just literally bounces off us back onto that canvas. So our canvas is so full of life that when a viewer walks by it, that life bounces right back to them. It's almost like being mirrors. And so how I still work at that is, what I discovered was, by using only one piece of information as painters, in other words, how does light fall on objects? And which is foundational. But all of a sudden I woke up one day and I went, wait, this is only one piece of the puzzle. And what I noticed, there's two things. The reason I noticed it is I'd go painting with people, and I would suddenly, I'd start walking around trying to get a sense of the place, feeling the wind, listening to sounds, trying to smell things, just get a sense of what was around me. And I'd look up, and everyone else had thrown open the hatchbacks, set up their stuff, launched into paintings, and were 3/4 through their paintings. And I went, wait a minute. And I started telling my students not to do that. I said, wait till you get a sense of the place. So number one is take time to get a sense of the place. Number two is not just a sense of the place with light, but a sense of all of our senses. Because we're trying to put in paint, not just how light falls on things, but trying to give the viewer the experience of all the things we felt. Heat, wind on our skin, an aroma, whatever. How do we do that? And so I started really tuning in all my senses. And at some point, if we can circle back, that actually led to what I teach, which is the no fear oil painting, and also another project, Interplay Artists, which uses the sense of hearing, auditory senses, to break through when you get stuck. I don't know about you, but I'll have times when I'm just stuck, and I'll have students who are stuck. And I specifically use sound to get people unstuck.
Can you articulate how you do that?
Yes. I'll give the best way perhaps as an example. And in fact, it was the genesis of Interplay Artists and No Fear oil painting. I was painting by the Animas River here in Durango, Colorado. And for anyone who has tried to paint moving water, I was just struggling. In other words, we're all used to, they say, paint what you see. Okay. Well, what you're seeing with moving water changes every millisecond. And so I was really struggling. I was trying to go, okay, and I was carefully trying to paint it and where the little reflection dots were, and I was noodling away, and, I see that's kind of foamy. And I looked down, and it was just dead. It didn't express what I was seeing at all. It was not going to give the viewer any sort of experience of what this place was like. And all of a sudden I thought, I need more information. So what I did was I heard that the water was making a lot of sound as it moved around the rock. So I closed my eyes and I started taking in that information until I could, and it was more than what the visual input was giving me. That sound started giving me information, and I suddenly started getting a sense of what that water was doing. And when I finally could feel it, there's a feeling, a click that happens in you where intuitively you go, all right, I understand this. And I quickly grabbed up some paint with my eyes still almost half closed and just went toward the painting and intuitively laid that down before I lost that feeling, and then walked away. I didn't touch those strokes again, and it solved the problem.
Lyn, I have a really important question for you.
Mm-hmm.
Are you doing drugs?
I don't do drugs at all. Reason being, I basically was born on drugs, I think.
I think you were too. So would that, in that particular instance, mm-hmm. would that have worked as effectively if you had done that before you started your painting? Or did you have to have a sense of that struggle of fighting that water and then listening to it and in your head kind of repainting it, I assume? Mm-hmm. Is there, like, does it work both ways for you?
Well, now I automatically collect that information right when I walk onto a scene. In other words, I know enough now to take time to collect the information I need from the sound, from perhaps the wind of moving branches. That gives me a sense of the gesture of trees, not just their static shape. So now it's just automatic. I go to a scene and I glance around and say to myself, what do I have to work with? And I'm looking at all the visual cues, but I'm also collecting all the other things. But then when I go to address something in a painting, I may focus on that specifically, like just take a couple minutes and tip my head and really listen to the sound and then do the strokes, et cetera.
And do you have, when you're walking around in a scene, are you looking mm-hmm. for what is it I'm responding to? What is it that's getting me excited about this scene?
Absolutely. I'll do a real quick glance. The thing you brought out very early on was the difference between, when we had to work fast, we were being very intuitive. So I'm careful not to get real analytical at the beginning. I'll do a 360-degree, glance to see, is there something just that simply catches my eye? In other words, something that made me kind of do a double take. And if it did, I'll go back and give it a second look and then ask myself why it caught my eye. And then the third question is, does it have what I need to make a good painting? Not everything that catches your eye or is incredibly beautiful will actually can translate into a good painting. And if, all the questions, are ticked off as yes, in other words, that I had an emotional attraction to it, it has the elements that I can build a good painting from, then and then the next thing is I'll sit and if I've answered all those yes, I think yes, I'll sit and do my value sketch. And there are times when I get done with that value sketch, I'll look at it and go, oh, I actually was wrong here. This really doesn't have enough structure to make a strong painting. And then I'll either pack up and find someplace else, or often all it takes is lifting up my paint palette and turning and painting what was, behind me. But I won't proceed if I don't have enough strength in that value sketch.
Well, I'll tell you, that's a really important point and a discipline, because, you're out there, you've invested in coming out, you've got your gear set up and then you're like, I'm going to paint this scene. I can't tell you how many hundreds of times I've started painting a scene only to discover it really is a sucko scene. And no matter how much my heart is into it, I just can't turn it into a decent painting. And so, you waste a lot of time doing that.
A good observation. Agreed. And I'll often have, I don't think any of us are into wasting time and materials. It's frustrating. It's kind of expensive. And it can spoil what could have been a real nice day. And I will have students come to me and say, can you help me with this painting or help me fix this painting? And the painting is 9/10 done. And I'll have to just look at them. I said, the mistake happened at step 2. So we really can't fix this. And that one becomes a Frisbee, and then we have to start over. So the way I really encourage people to work is, number one, to have a very specific methodology. And a methodology doesn't in any way constrain expression or an intuitive approach. The way I explain that is I say, think of a jazz musician. I mean, the incredible intuition and the beauty and just this responsiveness. Well, they so have mastered their instrument that they can do that. In other words, the mastery of music and their instruments has not constrained them, it's set them free. So I tell people, have a methodology that you never depart from, that has steps broken down. I think in the workplace it's called chunking. You guys use it. We all use it, You divide things into a big thing into smaller parts, and then those parts into smaller parts. And if you follow that, and I tell people, I say, until you have solved the problem to your satisfaction for a strong painting, and each step, you don't give yourself permission to move on, even though you're itching to, and mixing the paint is beautiful, and you can't wait to keep going. We're a little bit like a racehorse, and we've got to, we're pulling at the bit, and we have to hold ourselves back. Once you solve the problem at each step in the methodology, then go on to the next. And it's guaranteed you're going to end up with a strong painting. It may not be, everything may not be a brilliant masterpiece, but it will be a good, solid, strong painting that you go home and say, that was a good, satisfying day.
Well, I'm going to hand you a gold star right now. Here, I'm going to reach through the microphone and hand it to you, because this is, once in a while, something is discussed on the PleinAir podcast for the first time in history, and I think this is the first time in history that subject has ever been discussed. So here's your gold star. Don't drop it.
Can I stick it on my forehead?
Yes, you may.
Okay, it's right there.
It looks good. That looks good. So you got some fingerprints on it. You need to wipe it off a little bit. So do you have those moments? This happens to me. I'll go out with friends, and I don't want to be that guy that controls everything. And so I'll go out with friends, and they'll pick a spot, and I'm like, I hate this spot, but I don't want to say anything to them, right? And it's like, I'll do the 360. I'll look around, and there's nothing that pleases me. Now, sometimes I'll wander down the road a piece and I'll find something. But what do you do if you have a situation like that and you just don't find anything that you dig? Do you just go eat your lunch, or what do you do?
Well, I did. Well, it's one of the reasons I don't often paint in groups. If it's just going to be a social event and it doesn't really matter, and it's just the fun of hanging out with friends, then, it doesn't really matter. But if you really want to have a painting session, there's two things. Often, I'll do what you did, is I will leave the group and start sniffing around behind buildings and the other way up the river, and I'll usually find something seriously cool, that everyone else overlooked. But like you said, there's sometimes you're at a place where literally nothing blows your hair back. I did an experiment once because there were all these little sayings out there. In other words, you can't paint at high noon, and you have to wait for the golden light, or you this or that or whatever. And I remembered something I heard. I think it was Harvard, and a professor, and he was handing out the assignments for the final. You go in a basket and you pull out the subject, and the student looked at him and said, "I don't want to do this. It's boring." And this one was slap upside my head. He looked at the student and said, "There are no boring subjects. There are only boring students." And I went, "Oh, ouch." I said, "But what would happen if," and I live by question marks, what would happen if, and that's how I paint. What would happen if? I thought, what would happen if I went out painting on the most horrible, ugly day I could find and drove 1 mile and slammed on my brakes and made myself paint? What would happen? And this would be a case where you couldn't find anything good to paint because you're with your friends. And I did that. It was a icky, half-melted snow, winter, gray day, and I slammed on my brakes. I looked around, and there was nothing. But then I really looked around. And here's a specific thing you can do. If you can't find anything, turn off the I'm going to paint something switch in your brain. Like, there's not a barn, there's not a cool tree, there's not, and go, just start looking for shapes, interesting abstract shapes intersecting each other. And when you find those, you'll find something interesting. So I looked around, I found a tree that was this dark shape. The mud was making interesting jaggy shapes. And then there was this vertical with these thin lines intersecting everything, which was a phone pole with some wires. And I painted a little 6x8. I still have it hanging on my wall, and it's still one of my favorite paintings.
Yeah, I've often thought that would be a great workshop, is that, we're going to meet in a back alley somewhere, and you just have to find a way to create beauty out of something that you would never paint.
Absolutely. I took one of my workshops to a place that I knew on the Colorado River over near Moab, one of the most perfect painting spots on earth. This was cruel, actually. They still kind of hate me for it, but they laughed. And I lined them all up, and they looked up, and they were so excited, and I pointed at it, and I went, "You're allowed to paint anything except that." And they're just kind of mean. But that was an example of the point you're actually saying, is that we don't have to drive through the mountains for 1,000 years to find the beautiful painting. I'm very skeptical of really beautiful scenes. I rarely paint them. They often fall flat. I call them, there's a danger that they become what I call gas station calendar paintings. They're so stunningly beautiful that we almost can't bring something to them in a painting. So I'm extra careful with the scene that looks like it's handing it to you. I'm going, wait a minute, what's underneath that?
Well, and that's a tough thing to do, because the temptation, this happens to me all the time. I'm traveling to a beautiful place. We go to Europe once a year with an art group. And I'm in this beautiful place, and, the temptation is, I got to paint this beautiful harbor. It's just so incredibly beautiful. And then I'll see a buoy, just a single buoy with a bunch of stuff floating around it. And I'll go, no, that's what I want to paint. And,
Yeah.
you really are fighting yourself, because it's like, I spent all this money to come to Europe. I should be doing a painting in the Eiffel Tower, not the garbage can next to the Eiffel Tower. And, but ultimately you got to do something that you're really going to resonate with.
Yeah. And I like that you said you're fighting with yourself, because often that's what it is. We have these inclinations that we have to learn to recognize and resist. Even the input of the visual information coming at us in our own creative voice, or how we want to express it, is a real dance, because I will actually stop looking at the scene partway through a painting. I'll only glance up if I need a piece of information, because it's so powerful. Like you said, the Eiffel Tower was in front of you, and that image is so powerful. It actually can, just like, the wave surfing, it can just devour us, and we don't have the strength to sort of fight back and create a dance between the two. So I love your story about the inclination to paint the typical thing, but you were attracted toward the buoy, maybe with the seaweed or something like that. And I would just encourage people to always be a little bit skeptical,
Sometimes if I'm having that moment, I feel I have to scratch that itch, I'll paint a couple of really small paintings. And so I'll do a 6x8 of the one scene, and then a 6x8 of the other scene, so that I have time to do a couple of things. And I'm kind of leaning in that direction now anyway, because I typically paint 9x12s on location, once in a while a bigger one. But I'm kind of getting to the point now where I'm in a spot, and it's like, I want to do 2 or 3 paintings in this spot. So I'll either quarter off my canvas, or I'll just do 2 or 3 6x8s, so that I can get more information, because I'm not necessarily trying to turn them into finished paintings anyway. I'm just trying to get information.
Yeah. Yep. I agree. 6x8s are fabulous, and I have maybe half a dozen 6x8s hanging on my wall that, again, I won't sell them. They're my favorite little paintings. You can't get too fussy. You can't get too picky. You only have enough room to really kind of get after it. And I'll paint 6x8s with quite a big brush, an 8 or a 10.
Really?
Yeah. When I pick up a 6x8, I don't usually pick up a little brush to match it. I'll stick with the big brushes. And when you learn to use your brushes so that you can get almost anything you need out of, a size 8 or whatever for any size painting. And I think what you're doing is wonderful, because it gets away from this, okay, I'm going out painting, I have to make a painting. My musician friends, they don't, every time they pick up their instrument, they're not going, I'm giving a concert. They play and they play and they play and they play. And then at some point they bring it together and they give a performance. And that's how I approach my painting. In other words, every once in a while, I then muster my forces and said, I now am going to take all the information I've gathered, everything I've learned. I have an idea. I am going to walk on to Carnegie, whatever stage, Carnegie Hall, and I am now going to give the best performance I can give. So I separate the two. And what you just said is that, and I find it gives you a huge amount of freedom. It also brings some of the joy back. And I find that people actually, when they start doing that, and especially with these little 6x8s, progress faster.
I also think, to that point, and some of the other things we've just discussed, the idea of pushing yourself out of your comfort zone is when the best paintings emerge, or the best lessons emerge. And so you talked about going out on a crummy day, I remember learning a lesson from a guy by the name of Fred Picker, who was, he invented a system called Zone 6, which was essentially the value scale for photographers. And he worked with Ansel Adams, and he was a phenomenal phenomenal photographer, and I studied under him and when I was doing that. And he said the best photographs are the ones where you have to walk the furthest, stand through more rain, get up the earliest, and wait the longest, because he said it's the pain that actually makes for better photographs. And I think there's some sense of that, not always, but some sense of that in paintings as well. It's that, most of us, I'm not so much, but most of us tend to be sunny day painters. It's like, oh, it's raining, I'm not going out. And I remember standing in the middle of Maastricht, Holland, in a thunderstorm, painting out there with oil paint. And one of the most beautiful paintings I've done, because it's got drippiness on it and it's kind of cool. And I'll remember that experience more than I remember standing in a beautiful place with a beautiful vista on a perfectly sunny day.
Yes. Remember what I was saying about sensory input? That when you have that, when you're aware of it, it gets into your painting and then it comes back out. Those are more powerful paintings. You experience something.
And when you're fighting something like rain or wind, then you're not paying such close attention to your painting, because you can't. You're holding your easel with one hand when it's vibrating, and you can barely get your brush to create a straight line, and you're just kind of like, just get the information down and get out of here as quickly as possible.
Right. You're just trying to survive, so you can't get in the way of your painting. San Francisco, do you remember how cold it was at Pace?
Oh.
And I remember going, when we went to paint the bridge, the Golden Gate Bridge, it was, I'm pretty tough, but I was just like, oh no, oh heck no. I just don't want to paint, but I dutifully want to be a good example. So I had my backpack and I trudged out there and I go, okay, I probably everyone's seen me carrying my backpack. Now I'm going to go hide, and then and it was foggy and you couldn't see the bridge. And it was, like you said, misery top to bottom. Well, I looked up and first I thought, Lyn, you're standing in front of the Golden Gate Bridge, you loser, and you're not going to get your paints out. So I shamed myself into it, set my paints up. And then when I looked up a second time, I realized, oh my gosh, this bridge in the fog where you could hardly see any of it was so much more beautiful.
Well, plus you didn't have to paint every little wire. Every little support. That's such a difficult subject.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, sort of edit it for all of us, and it was disappearing up in this fog. And so I realized that what was making us suffer was handing us something much more beautiful. And I did a little 6x8, and I'm looking at it on the wall right now, and I won't ever sell it. I remember every minute. I loved the painting. Yeah, I mean, we all have our suffer fest stories, but they make good paintings and they make good campfire stories. We can all sit around with our s'mores.
And sometimes the paintings make good campfires.
Yeah, well, there's that too. I have been known to burn a pile of paintings.
You shouldn't be inhaling that burning cadmium smoke. I'm just saying.
Yeah, well, that was before they knew about that part, so I don't do that now.
So you talked to. Oh, go ahead.
There was one thing I wanted to bring up that you made me think of that relates to this. Is, have you ever had an intention to paint that day and literally gone, I just don't know what to paint. What should I paint? There's a million things to paint. What I do, and this may be of value to people or not, everyone comes at things their own way, but when I don't have a specific project already in mind, that I want to pursue, and I'm literally, I don't know what to paint, I immediately do a little scan. You can do it real quickly, and usually the answer is immediate, a little brain scan, where I ask myself a question. Again, I'm always asking questions. What if? What, I say, what am I avoiding and what scares me?
Oh.
In relation to painting.
Oh,
what are those?
That's a good question.
And immediately it comes to mind. I know exactly what it is when I ask myself that question. And I walk in the studio, and solving that problem, facing that fear, working through that becomes my next painting. Rarely have I painted a painting that I am not trying to solve something I've been avoiding. I started a new workshop called Painting. I actually call it It's Alive, and it's about painting living animals and people and putting them in the landscape, because I looked at landscapes and I thought, how many of these landscapes did the person actually choose to not have anything living in it because that was a powerful choice for the painting? Or did they paint the cafe scene with nobody sitting at the tables because they're afraid to put the figures in?
Oh, man.
And I realized that mostly it's the latter. And I will address this, because whenever I put together new workshops, I'm trying to find a missing piece, and that's one.
Well, you just shamed me, because I just realized how much I do that. It's never even crossed my mind, but I will tell you that a million times I've done a painting and left something out because I found that something to be too difficult.
Absolutely. And that is so common. You are not alone. So don't feel ashamed. I mean, that's more the rule, than the exception. And the thing I do want to encourage people is, the listeners, is that it doesn't take 5 years in atelier or a 10-year study of the human figure, et cetera, in order to know how to incorporate figures into the landscape. The other thing is I don't know if you've ever I've seen a beautiful painting where it looks like the horse or whatever was pasted onto, the cowboy was pasted onto the background,
Yeah.
They painted a landscape, then they found a picture of a cowboy and they sort of painted it on. That we were talking about, and you're very good in the magazines and even your own teaching about finding the ways to get from A to B efficiently. They're not shortcuts, they're just efficient. And so I just want to encourage people that there are very efficient ways to learn to, incorporate, like you want to put some figures sitting at the table. And that absolutely can be done. You don't have to be a master of the figure to do that. You can put the cows in the field. You don't have to know 100% cow anatomy. So I want people to go away going, wow, gee, I never thought of that. That would help my painting. That's cool.
I was thinking about this very subject just the other day, because I had this dream, and the dream was that I've had this dream before. It's a recurring dream, but something changed. And the dream was that I was in this big, long Gothic hall with high ceilings, and I was having dinner with all these famous artists from around the world in history, and that's where I eventually came up with the idea of the PleinAir Convention and the Figurative Art Convention, the idea of us all being together, breaking bread together. But the last dream was that I had that same dream, but I was sitting next to William Bouguereau, the great figurative painter, and he stood up and he did a toast, and he said to the all of art, something like that. And everybody toasted, and I said, is this a secret code? I don't understand what this means. And he said that we all tend to focus on what we love, but that's not what's good for us. He said, I am a figurative painter, but if I don't learn to paint landscapes well, then I can't put landscapes in my figures and make them believable. If I have figures and there's architecture, I have to make that architecture believable. He said, if I have objects sitting on the table, I have to get good at still life, and that has to be believable. So to that point, I think a lot of us as plein air painters are kind of like, look, I'm a landscape painter, but learning to paint a figure or learning to paint a portrait is so informative, and or as is learning a still life or learning, how to paint. Architecture for me is like the hardest subject in a painting. Mm-hmm. So it sounds to me like you're kind of going in that same direction.
Oh, absolutely. Because they're all based on, how can I say this?
I don't know.
The fabric, I'm thinking. Okay, of the underlying principles and structure of everything, the fabric of the universe, seep up through everything. So every time we, like I say, in order to learn how to paint a still life, how to paint a portrait, how to paint a landscape, how to paint an animal, and then to learn to be like a conductor in an orchestra. Then the mastery is to learn how to bring those instruments together and at just the right time to bring harmony to our painting. And if someone goes, but I don't like animals, which is unthinkable, but it would be like an orchestra, the conductor going, I really don't like bassoons, so we're not having any in the orchestra. You might want a bassoon sometime. So that is what you just said is so pivotal, and so that we can have all the tools at our fingertips when and if we might need them for our painting. So I would agree absolutely 100% with that. And here's the thing. Anytime I've forced myself to learn a skill or do an exercise or something that I know will be good for me, like you said, the things we don't love are the things we should do, I eventually find I kind of get addicted to them. I really didn't like forcing myself to do my value sketches. And now, frankly, sometimes I have more fun than doing the painting. So there's just some sort of human resistance. I don't know what it is, but if we can break through that, then usually we actually really enjoy doing it.
There have been so many lessons about overcoming fears, and that all the things you've talked about today have to do with overcoming fears and approaching things with no fear. And I should mention that you and I are working on a project together, and I don't know when it's going to happen, but one of these days we're going to record a video called No Fear Painting, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. In fact, and it also brings in the music element that you and I had talked about early in the podcast, where my partner, an Irish musician, Dave Curley, is actually going to be doing the music, where there'll be tools for, it's not background music or listening to music or painting to music, but as an actual tool where rhythms sound, and you actually learn to, like I painted the sound when I did that moving water, and it's teaching people to, when our sight gets numb, because we get numb to things, we can use another sense. So you paint the music. You don't paint to the music. You actually paint the sounds and learn to do that, and it guides your brushstrokes. So it's going to be a very exciting project. I'm really, really excited about it.
And I should mention that you're a musician and you play mandolin. Is that right?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, we should get you to play your mandolin on stage at the PleinAir Convention.
I'm not very good. In fact, I say I play music and I aspire to be a musician. But if I ever get competent, that I'm not shy on stage. So if I ever feel like I am competent enough that I could perform in a way that was enjoyable for the people, I'd be happy to.
Yeah, well, I'm in the same boat. I play the guitar, and when I'm in the Adirondacks, where we all, we have Rick Wilson always brings his guitar and plays a lot of music, and Eric Capel brings his guitar, and when there are usually 5 or 6 or 7 musicians, different instruments, I can play along, and nobody can tell that I suck.
Right. I was about to say that. I said, let's get Rick, and we'll put together a group, because if there's someone there who can, another instrument covers up when you make a mistake, when I make a mistake, I'm much better in a group. It's like it all sort of blends together.
Rick is really good at covering for me. He's been fabulous. Maybe we should do that. We did it one year on stage to open the convention. We called them the PleinAirs. And,
the PleinAirs, yeah.
The PleinAirs. And so maybe we should bring the PleinAirs back. What are you going to do at the convention? Do you have any idea?
Oh, as far as my demo?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes, I'm going to do a little preview of parts, since there's not a lot of time to complete a whole painting. I'm going to give them a little preview of No Fear oil painting, what's going to be on the instructional video. Of some brush handling, and also a little something they can really take home is a breakdown of methodology.
Cool.
And I'm going to be bringing things they can actually, since I don't have time to work through it, there'll be things they can actually look at and see the methodology, and that I've had printed up in sort of large format, which, absolutely get out your phones, take pictures, and go home, try this.
I'm curious.
I'm looking forward to it.
I want to ask you something that I haven't prepped you for this, but you come to the convention almost every time, and many times not being faculty. Why do you keep returning? What is it about it that that cranks your clock, or, as you say, blows your hair back?
For me,
sorry to put you on the spot.
No, absolutely. Every time it puts wind under my wings. As a painter, an artist, a teacher, an instructor, you are pouring so much out that there are times when I'm running on empty. I've got nothing. In other words, I've given it all, and even when I paint, I reach really deep to paint. It's why I'm not super prolific. And so I will just get to where my tanks are empty. And I have found that the convention, I always learn something wonderful. And from the other instructors, I'll, walk in and out. I love that you can just sort of choose who you want to hear, what you might want to learn. The expo is fabulous for researching maybe a new surface, a new material, picking up a brush, and the vendors are always generous. With discounts, I'll pick up a bunch of frames. It's a huge part of it. Going to new locations, meeting new friends. Art can be sort of a solitary thing sometimes. And I've made some just lifelong friends. And in fact, there's a group, there's some friends who I got to know more at the conventions and then on the PleinAir circuit that, we just are there for each other. So I have found it to be invaluable for my own progress. And like I say, just when I'm running on empty, I just know in the spring I'm going to be able to roll up to the Texaco gas station and refuel, and I always go out if they're re-inspired. So
same thing happens to me. I can live off of that energy for a year. It helps me so much. I have one last question for you, and then we're going to have to blow out of here. But you studied under the amazing Dan McLaws.
I did. I was in his illustration class at Art Center. I wasn't lucky enough to be one of the day students because I was already in the industry, and I would drive 2 hours at night to get up to Pasadena to get to Dan McLaws' class. And like I said, he was one of the very pivotal people in my art journey because it's not so much, he taught techniques, but he taught me how to learn, and he taught me how to let go, to not cling, and to not be afraid. Do I have time to give a quick example? Because this may be of value. Okay. Yep. I worked incredibly hard on my homework assignment, and it was actually quite a nice illustration. And he walked up and was quite silent, and he pulled a piece of sandpaper out of his back pocket.
Oh, no.
And he literally attacked my illustration. And I was, young, in the industry and very vulnerable, and, you always want to please the teacher. And so he just shredded that thing, and he scratched it, and he rubbed it, and he'd scratch it some more. And then he picked my paints up, and he started going back into it. Now, he wasn't really disturbing anything about the core of my concept or even how I painted it. But after he had poured the grit into it and then pulled it back out, it went from nice to powerful. And that he changed my life. And he also just taught me how to learn, even when I didn't have the blessing of having a particular instructor, how to dig out the information, how to try things, how to experiment, how to not be afraid to let go of the best stroke I've ever laid down if it didn't serve the painting. And I don't know where I'd be. I'm sure he's quite unaware that he affected a young illustrator that way. But I'm very grateful, and he's a great painter.
What a great lesson. And Lyn, this has been, I have to say, one of my favorite podcasts of all time. This conversation, I think we could probably go on and on and on and on, and unfortunately we're out of time. But you are so brave, so bold, so intellectually stimulating and thoughtful about what you do. And such an inspiration as a painter. I'm just so pleased to know you and to have experienced this conversation today with you, but also just to know you in general and to watch you paint. It's embarrassing painting next to you because you just knock them out of the park, and it's hard to be there and do your own thing. At the same time, you watch you, and then you got to go back and get inspired because you're just so good at this. So thank you so much for being on the podcast today.
Thank you, Eric. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it, and I really love and appreciate all of you for what you're doing for all of us.
Well, we will see you soon.
Yes, very soon. Can't wait. I'll bring my mandolin. I think Rick dubbed me Mando Lyn.
Mando.
Yes, my nickname.
Okay. Well, thank you, Mando, for being on the PleinAir Podcast.
Okay, thank you, Eric.
Thanks again to Lyn Boyer. She is a hoot. Lots of fun. Fun to hang out with, too. Are you ready for some marketing ideas?
This is the Marketing Minute with Eric Rhoads, author of the #1 Amazon bestseller, Make More Money Selling Your Art. Proven techniques to turn your passion into profit.
In the Art Marketing Minute, I try to answer your art marketing questions, and you just email them to me, eric@artmarketing.com. Here's a question from Rob Ragland. I don't know where Rob is from. He says, Bob Ragland, I'm sorry, says, I'm interested in knowing how artists are selling their art in untraditional ways. Well, I'm interested too. I'm always keeping an eye on that. Bob, the untraditional quickly becomes the traditional once it works. As you know, we've observed because of the coronavirus, we observed a lot of people doing some new and interesting things. One thing I saw recently is an artist doing a raffle for a painting, and they're selling tickets at $10 or $20 each, and the goal is to sell enough tickets to cover the costs that they would normally get, and got a lot of entries and did a raffle, and then is doing another one. Another artist I saw is doing an auction where you don't actually see the painting. You're buying an unseen painting and you're auctioning for it. And La Papa did this and started the idea, Laguna PleinAir Painters. And I was in it, as a matter of fact. They raised over $20,000. So it could be done by an artist as well. And of course, lately, lots of people are doing virtual art shows with links to buy. And that's been very effective for very many, a lot of galleries and artists doing it. So I think it's something that will probably continue. I like to see people thinking outside of the box. Hate that term, though. The next question comes from an anonymous person in Las Vegas who says, do prints that are the same size as the original devalue the original painting? I worry that some people won't know the difference. Well, prints are controversial, and some hate them, others love them. I've watched a lot of artists make some money with prints. I've watched them do licensing to print companies, which is not as much money, but you've got somebody working for you night and day and selling that for you. So I think that's a pretty good thing. I think prints are a nice thing because a lot of people cannot afford an original, but they go into a gallery or they see your work, they'd like to own it, but they can't afford an original. I don't know that that's going to stop somebody from buying an original. Obviously, it's going to be priced considerably different. And quite frankly, some people say, hey, if I never sell the original, but I sell 100 prints off of it, I'm making more money than I would have from the original. So it doesn't really matter. Some galleries love them. Some galleries hate them. You got to have a talk with your gallery about that. I don't know if size matters. Might not be a bad idea to vary the size a little. And quite frankly, it's nice to have different sizes. But if you get too small, then you're going to have a minimum price that you might not want. Remember, you want somebody walking out of the gallery, out of your booth or whatever, spending a decent amount of money, and you want to make sure your prints are valuable, but also that you're making money on them. Prints are not cheap to make, not good ones, not by the time you put them in a what do they call that? I want to say a frame, but it's, I'm not thinking of the term. A mat. There we go. Anyway, sometimes it takes a little time for those words to enter this old brain. Anyway, so a mat, and then, of course, a piece of plastic or something to put it up. And I think it's something to talk to your gallery about, but I don't see any problem with doing it. I used to think there was a problem. I've changed my tune on that a little bit. I think anything goes today. You got to survive. You just got to make sure you're being ethical. Anyway, that's today's Art Marketing Minute. I hope you've enjoyed it.
This has been the Marketing Minute with Eric Rhoads. You can learn more at artmarketing.com.
A reminder that the 31st is the deadline to get the lowest price on the PleinAir Convention, and we do have a guarantee for quarantine that you get your money back. If you want your money back or want to apply it to a future event, if you or we should have to cancel because of something going on and not feeling safe or whatever. But we're going to follow all the protocols. Hotels got all the protocols. They're sanitizing the rooms. It's going to be a beautiful thing. And also 31st is deadline to enter PleinAir Salon. So you can get that at pleinairsalon.com or pleinairconvention.com. Also, if you've not, how dare you? No, I don't really. That's okay. If you've not seen my blog where I talk about life, art, philosophy, other things, check it out. It's called Sunday Coffee, and you can find it at coffeewitheric.com. Then subscribe. It's free. Comes to you every Sunday morning. I sit out on the porch and sometimes by the lake and do it. So anyway, this is fun. We'll do it again sometime like next week. I'll see you then. I am Eric Rhoads, publisher and founder of PleinAir Magazine. Remember, it's a big world out there. Go paint it. We'll see you. Goodbye.
This has been the PleinAir Podcast with PleinAir Magazine's Eric Rhoads. You can help spread the word about plein air painting by sharing this podcast with your friends. And you can leave a review or subscribe on iTunes so it comes to you every week. And you can even reach Eric by email, eric@pleinairmagazine.com. Be sure to pick up our free ebook, 240 plein air painting tips by some of America's top painters. It's free at pleinairtips.com. Tune in next week for more great interviews. Thanks for listening.